conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome everybody to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Another amazing week, and on today's show I had a listener ask me about libraries. Is there a way that we could possibly start talking about Christians, especially being able to opt out of having to fund their local libraries when they do things like what we just came off of, the banned book week, where they take your dollars, taxpayer dollars, to forward an agenda that's not only anti-Christian, but also that large swaths of the American people disagree with, hence why they don't want their tax dollars funding it. We'll talk about that. Also, we have the Courier-Journal doing a hit piece on the Latin School, the Highlands Latin School in Louisville. We're probably going to see a lot more of these as they go after private schools in an attempt to tear them down in the minds of the voters, because they're trying to fight against Amendment 2. They're trying to stop individuals having support for Amendment 2. And one of the things that drives support, obviously, is people want to go to private schools. So they're going to try to do these hit pieces to go ahead and convince you that you do not want to go to private schools. We'll talk about how ridiculous their most recent attempt is. Ford has announced their way forward and plans forward that deals with specifically EVs and batteries. And they mentioned how their visit to China is what influenced them. We'll take a look at that article because it's incredibly important, as Kentucky has went ahead and staked hundreds of millions of dollars, specifically $410 million, to specifically just Ford's EV market. We'll talk about the ramifications. And then finally, turning to the national news, I know many people have spoken about Kamala Harris's, I think, only solo interview. They're not counting the Oprah interview, but her most recent interview with MSNBC. We'll go over some of her answers, give you a little bit of feedback I have on them, a little bit different than probably what you're hearing everywhere else. Specifically, what I noticed as a former political candidate that she is doing wrong, what points to me that she's really not very good at this. So we're going to have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But first, of course, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe if you're watching this on Facebook or X or YouTube. You can do all those things. If you're not watching there, but you're watching on TV or radio, you can tune into this show. It's on more often than just Mondays. Generally speaking, an episode comes out about 3 to 4, 5 days a week or so. You can catch all of them by visiting theandrewshow.com and hitting the Listen Now tab. Now, be warned though, for those of you looking forward to listening to me all this week, I will be off this week other than today's show. I will be on basically vacation for the week, so I will be not doing any shows Tuesday through Friday, but that doesn't mean you can't catch up on old shows. I know a lot of you don't watch every single episode, listen to every single episode, so head over to theandrewshow.com or to your favorite podcast listening location and listen to those old shows. Perhaps you'll go ahead and learn something. You can do that for the rest of the week. And of course, you can reach out to the show by emailing info@theandrewshow.com or at theandrewshow.com, hitting the contact tab. Now, that was a longer than normal preamble, but without further ado, let's dig down into it. So I got a question from a viewer regarding this banned book week. Well, specifically talking about the libraries. They didn't mention the banned book week, but I know what was driving it. It's because these libraries have been pushing out this banned book week, setting up displays, pushing books that they call, quote unquote, banned. Now, of course, they're lying. Banned books used to mean something important. It used to mean something like, you couldn't purchase the book anywhere. Nobody would sell the book. It was hard to get a hold of. They did book burnings. That used to be what banned books meant. But of course, the liberals, always looking for words that you would attach more severe meanings to than using them improperly, have attached the idea of banned books onto books that they're simply told they cannot expose minors to. And books that are pornographic, books that have a lot of issues. I mean, I know there's been books that have been banned in schools before because they have the N-word in it or something. But putting that to the side, we're not talking about banning books because they were wrote at a period of time where you could use the N-word more freely. No, we're talking about books that literally should be illegal to distribute to minors. They're banned in schools the same way a Playboy magazine or a Hustler magazine should be banned in schools. But of course, they're going to pretend like this is banned and there's something evil happening. In fact, at my local libraries here in Fayette County, I did come across their banned book display when I found myself in one of these, what has become a completely liberal communistic wasteland. That's what our libraries have become. In fact, I can go all over our city and never see anybody wearing a mask without fail. I have seen people wearing masks, like no joke. If you want to see somebody wearing a mask in our modern time, wearing cloth masks that have been proven not to work, go to your local library, you'll find them. But anyway, so I came across their own banned book display and I made sure to grab a pamphlet. And they list the top 10 banned books. Now, actually, the left has an advantage when we're discussing these types of materials because I cannot, in good conscience, show you what is in these books and what is said in these books, going over my own beliefs of not displaying sexually graphic material. 2, I couldn't show this to you for the TV show, couldn't show you that because it would immediately be called horrible, questionable content, inappropriate content. I can't read it out over air on the radio because it would violate FCC regulations. And then on top of that, frankly, I wouldn't feel comfortable displaying it without blurring it out. In fact, people who have tried to address this content in their schools have been met with being told they couldn't even finish reading the passages because they were so sexually explicit. But yet, of course, the left is going to go ahead and fight to continue to show these types of books. And their number one most challenged book of all, of course, is Genderqueer. Now, I've covered this on the show, I think a year or two ago, with graphic images that involve displaying sexual acts between minors. It's a comic book displaying sexual acts between minors. But just alone, what the library itself wrote about the book should tell you everything you need to know. So reading from this, reading right from their banned book guide, here you go, Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. In 2014, Maya Kobabe, who uses E-M-E-M, E-I-R, so E-M, pronouns, thought that a comic of reading statistics would be the last autobiography comic E would ever write. Started as a way to explain to I can't read this. Like, these pronouns are stupid. I'm reading what they wrote, and I think I have to repeat the pronouns here for you to understand how absolutely stupid our libraries have become. To explain family, what it means to be non-binary and asexual, Genderqueer is more than a personal story. It is a useful and touching guide on gender identity, what it means, and how to think about it for advocates, friends, and humans everywhere. And of course, it's banned because, or people don't like to see it. They like to see the book not in schools because it has very explicit sexual material in it. So the question is that I was asked by the listener is, can we somehow opt out? Unfortunately, there's no real solid good way to do so, though it does go into the belief that I have that if we want to all get along, we have got to get government out of our lives. And if that includes stopping funding the libraries, then maybe that's it. Because as the number one way to drive division between people is to take their money and use it to fund things that go against their beliefs. Coming up after this, we'll be discussing the Courier-Journal's hit piece on Highlands Latin School. We'll have that after this short break. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So, the anti-school choice advocates, the people who want you to vote no on Amendment 2, have decided a new tactic, or picked up a tactic, in order to try to dissuade you, because they do have a problem. You see, quote-unquote public school advocates have a big issue, and their issue is that, well, public schools kind of suck. Their outcomes are absolutely horrific. less than 50% of kids graduating from K through 12 public institutions in Kentucky are proficient in math or reading. Absolutely huge problems with behaviors. They have problems with transportation, of course, if it's up in Louisville, to the point where they're just decide to pay parents $3 to $5 a day to transport their own kids to school. And so as these issues continue, of course, the idea of private schools becomes more and more interesting. And they need to attack this. They need to drag this down. And we see an attempt here as they go after the Highlands Latin School in Louisville with a hit piece article / opinion articles. They've wrote several articles now about this school trying to tear it down. And here's the reason why they specifically target this school. Actually, I'm going to read through the article and let's see if we get to the point where you can see why they chose this school to target. Let's go ahead and dig in here. So, it starts off, this is by Joe Girth, the opinion article, Could Amendment 2 Force Tax Dollars to Schools Where Kids Are Mistreated? It starts off with, if a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Kentucky in 6 weeks passes, your tax dollars could go towards sending kids to a school where former students say teachers bully kids and drive them to tears and self-harm. So right off the bat, we're starting off with an attack based upon some individuals who say they had quote-unquote bad experiences at this school. But of course, they're not going to compare because Joseph Girth is not interested in being honest or straightforward. He actually wants to paint this school, this private school, as some horrific place, more horrific than public schools are. But Joseph Girth has a problem. You see, the Highlands Latin School itself has never been studied for a suicide rate amongst its student body. But back in 2014, the American Psychiatric Association did do a study on private schools versus public schools and suicidality amongst children. Now, I don't want to bring this up. I think it's a morbid kind of argument to make, what I'm about to say, which is, frankly, kids kill themselves a third less often at private schools. But Joseph Girth decided to try to attack a private school, a private institution that's doing an excellent job educating children based upon the fact that some students say that they went through what a lot of students go through, public and private, and that is a difficult time while going through puberty, where your mind's forming, you have raging hormones, and you struggle with different emotions and feelings. That's normal. But Joseph Girth doesn't want you to believe it's normal, so I have to bring up the fact that in 2014, the American Psychiatric Association found that a third less of private school students are a full third less, 1/3 less likely to try to commit suicide than public schools. Here's another chunk of the article. Highlands Latin School also routinely discards kids who fall behind in class or have minor behavioral issues and forces them to leave because they're just not good enough. So this is a common argument we hear from the left, of course. They will claim that, well, public schools have to accept all kids. And so that's why they struggle compared to private schools who can pick and choose who they want to bring into the school and who they want to educate. So they are acknowledging, everybody's acknowledging that some students have behavioral issues. Some students learn faster than others. Some students do better than others in certain subjects. And creating a private school that says, you know what, let's give you an educational opportunity because you're gifted is not allowed. You can't only achieve that if your parents have enough money. And I think that's pretty dark. I think if a child shows that they are gifted in a particular subject or subjects, if they show that they want to behave, if they're coming from a family that cares more about a child's education, but maybe they just simply can't afford a private school, they should still have the opportunity to leave those children behind that are dragging them down, that are hurting their opportunities. Now that may sound cold or mean to say that, yes, there are kids who either come from families that are more involved or they are naturally gifted. And I want them to be able to leave the other kids behind and join kids who care about their education or come from families that care about their education. or that are equally as gifted as them. And I don't care if we provide them the opportunities to do it. I think every child, regardless of their parents' ability to pay, should have the opportunity to get the fullest education that they personally can get. If Joseph Girth bothered to read his own publication, the Courier-Journal, and bothered to kind of search this out before he mentioned it, he would have found this line out of an article from 2019 from the Courier-Journal. Now, for those of you unaware, magnet schools are part of the public school program where they take kids who are specifically gifted or talented or care more about their education, and then they put them off on their own to go to more elite programs in schools within public schools to offer them the opportunity. Of course, though, these magnet programs never have enough space for all the kids that do qualify for them, or all the families that would like to take advantage of it because, well, they're so highly sought after. But if Joseph Girth did bother to read his own paper, what he would have found in this article from 2019 is this. Though not all magnets have specific entrance criteria, and they're talking here about Jefferson County Public Schools, they have traditionally been allowed to exit students from their programs. Magnets have either withdrawn students outright or encouraged parents to enroll their children elsewhere, critics of the system say. In other words, when students aren't meeting the school's expectations, whether that be because of grades, discipline, or attendance, they're asked to leave. For many, that means returning to their resides or their home schools. Fascinating. So when a public school does the same exact thing that private schools are doing, mum's the word. Joseph Girth doesn't want to point that out. That doesn't work for him. But when private schools are saying, look, you know what, let's be honest. We want to create a learning environment here where it's only the kids who care, who have parents that care about their education. That's what we want here. Well, you can't have that. Joseph Girth's got a big problem with it. When private schools do it, parents want vouchers to help send their kids to those options. He's got a problem with it then. But when the public school does the same exact thing, but gives parents less options because they can't handle the amount of demand there. Here's another complaint they have here. They said failures in the classroom sometimes meant that the teachers there would chastise them for disappointing God. So Joseph Girth is just aghast that you would go to a Christian school, and when you commit something that according to the Christian religion is a sin, they then would tell you you're sinning, like, Christians do. He hates the religious aspect of the First Amendment. He only wants people to teach and say things that he approves to kids, and telling a Christian child, hey, you just sinned, God doesn't approve of that kind of behavior. That is too much. Joseph Girth, you can't say that to the kids. In fact, his hate for religious freedom within these schools, that's what he really hates, shines even brighter when he mentions this here. Some conservative religious schools in Louisville use textbooks that make outlandish claims that dinosaurs and humans shared the earth together, and because that's what their religion and not science tells them. Outlandish claims, Joseph Girth calls it, when people believe something religiously about how the earth was created. Science doesn't tell us that the earth and the universe was created by intelligent hands. It makes some sort of theory about Big Bang. But Joseph Girth says, no, you can't teach those beliefs at schools, because Joseph Girth just hates the First Amendment. In fact, he hates people in general, and he can't even critically think. This blind hatred for anybody that doesn't think like him blinds him from the ability to at all have an opinion that is nuanced or intelligent and is just showing this true. One such book that these schools are using, written 1899, says that in the American South, the climate there was so warm and often so moist that it was thought only African Americans could thrive as laborers. The planters therefore bought many slaves to cultivate their rice, cotton, indigo, sugar, and tobacco plantations. Now, of course, this isn't defending slavery. Book wrote in 1899. I'm sure they may be using parts to show how history is taught. He doesn't really talk about how they're getting this textbook, who's it coming from, because they say the book was wrote in 1899. Are you trying to claim to me, Joseph, That they're passing around an over 100-year-old textbook? Or is this a new publication that's been changed? And maybe that line hasn't been changed. Joseph Girth has a problem with it. But maybe that may not be true. But maybe what they're trying to say in the book is that the South bought only African American slaves. Because this is a fact that Joseph Girth doesn't want to address. The fact that during the time of chattel slavery in the South, during the time of the black slave in the South, there were other groups with other skin colors that were also slaves, including white people, Asian individuals that were bought and sold and traded as slaves all around the globe. But they're talking about, why did they specifically go after the African slave? Well, it's because of this false belief that they would thrive better in the American South. Maybe that's what the book is trying to say. If you thought with a little bit of understanding of what they were trying to make a comment about, that's not what Joseph Girth wants to hit on. Now, we know this book isn't original to 1899 because I don't think they would have used the term African Americans. So clearly, they're not literally using a book from 1899. They clearly edited it over time. But there's another line in here that I think is worth discussing. And also, of course, I want to point out, why are they going after this Highlands Latin School specifically? We'll have that after this short break. And welcome back to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we were going over a Joseph Girth opinion article going after the Highlands Latin School in Louisville. And in this, there's been a series of, I would call them hit pieces coming out of the Courier-Journal going after the Highlands Latin School. We were talking about things Joseph Girth was attacking them for, and I was tearing down every single point. One of the points, too, he was talking about the books that they use. He was claiming they use a book out of 1899. I'm not so convinced the book's never been edited since 1899, considering some of the quotes that he's using out of here are using words that I don't think they would have used in 1899. But, we were talking about a line out of there dealing with slaves, and this was his critique about the book, okay? This was his critique. It never makes it clear that the real problem was the white men in the South were just too lazy to do the work themselves and would rather use cruelty to force black slaves to do it. So he's claiming that the books being used at Highlands Latin are improper because they don't make it clear that the white men in the South were too lazy to do farm work themselves and would rather use cruelty to force black slaves to do it. And I can tell you this much, I never once learned that specifically either when I was going to public schools. I mean, I graduated from a public high school in Kentucky. I don't think any school specifically says that, and if that school does say that, and if they're teaching that, you should immediately remove your kid out of that school, because that is frankly the most ridiculous take I've ever heard. That white men didn't do it in the South because they were too lazy to do the work themselves. That's not accurate. White men didn't do the work in the South because they had to pay the white men to do it. Slavery's an evil, awful thing. Let's not pretend it wasn't. But to pretend the fact that farmers didn't do the work themselves because they were too lazy, no. They didn't do the work themselves because it was a work that required hundreds of hands to do it, and they didn't use white people because they didn't want to pay them. That was the real evil. Slavery has nothing to do with work ethic of the slave owner. It has to do with the bottom line and how the quest for money can drive people to do evil things. If you're teaching that they just did it because of laziness, you're missing the entire point, and you're not warning people about the dangers of something like the love of money can do. That greed can drive people to do things like, if they can get away, if there's not a competition on the marketplace, and if people's rights aren't protected, their rights to life, liberty, and property are not protected, and they aren't able to protect it themselves, that we are given those God-given rights. That's why when we do work for other people, it has to be a free given agreement and they have to pay us. But when you don't believe everybody has value from their creator, it can provide the excuse to do things out of greed, out of wanting to help the bottom line. That's why they did it. because they didn't have to pay slaves. Slaves were cheaper than paying actual labor. Laziness, nothing to do with it. The bottom line, greed and the belief that not every human being has God-given rights. That's what it is. But of course, Girth doesn't want to acknowledge that because Girth doesn't believe every human being has God-given rights. He doesn't believe unborn children have God-given rights until maybe they're born and the mother has decided to keep it. Because I'd be curious what Girth's beliefs are on things like Born Alive acts where children come out alive and birthed in a botched abortion. So they don't come out murdered. So I'd be curious what his beliefs are there, but he doesn't believe that. And he certainly doesn't believe you have a right to property because, quote unquote, the rich just need to pay their fair share. Well, that means you don't own anything. He probably agrees with Obama when he says, you didn't build that. See, he can't acknowledge that his thought process, that evil, the belief that you don't have a right to life, liberty, and property, that belief, the same belief that underlines the excuse for slavery, he holds himself. He can't admit that. Can't admit that. So why are they doing this to the Highlands Latin School specifically? Why are they going after him? Well, it's for a very specific reason. And it deals with a line, they give it away here in the article. This is what Girth says. He says, whatever, schools like Highlands Latin could stand to make a windfall if the legislature passes laws that would allow the state to pay all or part of a student's tuition. Highland Latin charges tuition between $2,990 and $9,300 depending on grade level. That's the real reason why they're going after them, and I would not be surprised to see specifically these Latin schools coming under the gun with these school choice, anti-school choice groups. And why is that? Well, because what they've talked about is if the state just allows money to follow the kids. So right now there's a SEEK formula where schools are paid per student that attends their school. And right now from the state, it's about $4,300 a year. And so if a voucher system, quote unquote, was created from the state level, all that voucher could be, and without having to raise our funding a lot into education, would be $4,300. That's it. And it wouldn't cost the state another dime to educate kids, offering a voucher at $4,300. That would be what they allocate it for. And so at that level, though, one of the common attacks I see from people who don't want to see school choice pass is that, well, most private schools you can't afford it for $4,300. That's not enough to cover it. It will only really help out the rich people. But what happens when you show them things like Highlands Latin School that has the average 3-year ACT of 30? 30 is their average 3-year ACT. 30 out of their students. When they show these fantastic results coming out of their kids and showing the proficiency in reading and writing and abilities they have, and you can achieve that without really coming out of pocket at all, or maybe a few $100 a month at the most if you split it up over 12 months, and you can achieve that same level of education for your kids, that's awfully attractive to a lot of people, and that would cause people to support Amendment 2. That caused people to support school choice. So they need to tear these schools down because they can't allow the schools that are good options that can fall in line where suddenly, if you did get a $4,300 voucher, you could suddenly now actually afford to send your kids to them. Large swaths of people would. They can't let that stand. They're going to need to attack it. So we got this coming out of Ford. This is from, was published on the 29th from The Street. It says, Ford CEO's haunting visit to China triggered its radical EV shift. This is an important story, I think, because here in Kentucky, we have dumped $410 million promised to Ford for their battery plant down in Hardin County. We've bet big on this battery plant and bet big that it'll have payoff. Already we've seen delays in construction in one of its 2 facilities that it's promised to build. We've also seen revisions down in the number of jobs it's supposed to bring, but they claim it'll still be a big boom for Kentucky, that EVs are the future. This article says something different. Let's go to it now. Last month, Ford executives shocked fans and skeptics by announcing radical changes to its electric vehicle strategy. This is really about us being nimble and listening to responses from our customers, Ford CFO John Lawyer told Automotive World News in August. We looked where the segment was evolving, the amount of competition the customer needs, and then the size of the battery that needs to go into a pure EV. The cost structure, the pricing. We cannot put together a vehicle that met our requirements to be profitable in the first 12 months. The article goes on to explain how Ford went to China, checked out their EV advances that they had going on there, and came up with a decision that perhaps they just couldn't compete. We'll talk about the ramifications of that, as well as the Kamala Harris interview. After this short break, you're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you are back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Here in this final segment, we're talking about Ford, talking about shift out of EVs into hybrids. They said they went over to China and they discovered something that China, they could never compete with on the EV market, that China's batteries were cheaper, their engineering was cheaper, their cars cheaper. Jim, this is nothing like us, like before. Lawyer, who's the CFO, reported. He said, these guys are ahead of us, talking about China, saying China is an existential threat to the automotive industry, to Ford specifically, even with the tariffs being proposed on Chinese automotive into America. That still makes it hard on Ford because they have to compete with them in other markets like the European market. So it's just frankly not enough to get the job done. So instead they're thinking they're going to have to move over to hybrids in order to be competitive. Basically, they're like, look, we can't provide the battery range and manufacture that battery range for a price because of our costs like they can in China. And what are the things affecting Chinese costs? Why are they able to get it down? Well, quite frankly, it's regulations dealing with labor. Their labor they can pay far less. Also regulations when it comes to the caustic materials they're using, like lithium. The fact that lithium they don't have to necessarily import, that lithium's right there for China. Or if they do import it, it's traveling a lot less farther. The fact that they don't have to deal with tariffs on products coming in. Because Ford's partnered with Chinese and Japanese companies and Korean companies, Asian companies, in order to bring their EVs this far. So the question becomes, what does this do, though, to the EV plant in Kentucky? We've staked our big dreams on it. It's going to continue, is it not? I don't know. I know that Beshear and the legislators need to come forward and talk about these issues. They need to talk about exactly what's going on with this plant, what we can expect to occur, when we can expect it, because there's a lot of unknowns out there, and they don't want to talk about it, though, because, of course, that might affect their ability to get reelected if they all come forward and admit they gave hundreds of millions of dollars to a pie-in-the-sky dream. So moving on now, Kamala Harris's interview, very fascinating, interesting stuff. I believe it's her second interview. First one solo. They're not counting the Oprah interview. Most people aren't. I guess because that's more of a talk show, not really an interview. If you count that, maybe it's her second solo interview. Of course, Trump does these all the time, does entire podcasts. But there is something I want to hit upon specifically. Now, as a candidate for office, I understand the advice that she was probably given. And this is, we're often told, don't answer the question you were asked, answer the question you wish you were asked. Now, this is typically, for candidates, supposed to mean that you need to find something close. You need to seem like you're answering their question while actually answering something different. But Kamala Harris received that piece of information and then decided to just answer some random question that they're really not being asked. She's not even dealing with the heart of it. That's why you can see politicians ask questions, get asked questions, answer them, ramble, and then most of the time the interviewer isn't even necessarily asking them for a follow-up. The interviewer doesn't sit there and say, what do you mean by that? That wasn't the question I asked. Because a lot of times it does at least sound like they answered the question because they're getting to the heart of it. And Kamala Harris, though, just doesn't really get that portion. She's really bad at this. So here's an example, okay? So in this clip here, she was asked, what are you going to do if the GOP won't agree to raising taxes? Take a listen to the question, take a listen to her answer, and then we get back to it.
And expanding that child tax credit, or you mentioned housing before, giving that extra money for a first home. If you can't raise corporate taxes, or if GOP takes control of the Senate, where do you get the money to do that? Do you still go forward with those plans and borrow?
Well, but we're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. That's just it. It's about paying their fair share. I am not mad at anyone for achieving success, but everyone should pay their fair share. And it is not right that the teachers and the firefighters that I meet every day across our country are paying a higher tax than the richest people in our country.
Now, the question she was asked was, what are you going to do if the GOP won't let you raise the taxes? And instead of answering the question that you wish you were asked, right? So GOP won't let you raise the taxes. Are you still going to go forward with these policies? Now, you could pretend that question, the question you were asked, was something that's a lot closer to it. Like, something like, how are you going to work bipartisanly with the GOP if they're in the House and Senate? The GOP has control of one or both chambers. How will you work in a bipartisan fashion with them to accomplish your goals? That should have been the question she pretended to answer. But instead, she picked a different question that makes it clear that she's not answering even something remotely close to what she was asked. The question she decided she wished she was asked in that circumstance was, should everyone pay their fair share of taxes? And when you think about it that way, her answer makes a lot more sense. Because she picked the wrong question to pretend they asked, because it wasn't even similar. And she does this in more than just this one place. Here's another situation. She's asked about the U.S. Steel situation going on where U.S. Steel wanting to sell to Japan. I do have to say the way the question's worded could create some issues and probably hurt her, if I'm to be honest. Let's take a listen to that.
Then let me ask you a business that matters a lot to this town.
Yeah.
U.S. Steel.
Yes.
Right? When you think Pennsylvania, when you think Pittsburgh, you got the Liberty Bell in Philly, and you got U.S. Steel in Pittsburgh.
That's right.
A Japanese company wants to buy them. You are opposed to this idea. Many people are. But if the deal doesn't go through, they have said people could lose jobs, they could close mills, they could leave the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, that is like moving the Liberty Bell to Newark. So which is more important?
It's most important that we maintain America's ability to have American manufacturing of steel by American workers for a number of reasons, which includes, again, back to the point of growing our economy and how I think about the economy overall, investing in new industries. There is not a new industry that I can imagine that is not going to require steel as a manufacturing of steel as a fundamental part of what it accomplishes. And having American workers in an American company manufacturing that steel for those new industries is going to be critically important, not only in terms of our economy, but also in the context of national security. Most people now realize if we didn't before the pandemic and the strain on supply chains and an over-reliance on foreign manufacturing, that we have to be intentional about U.S.-based manufacturing. And of the products that we have to prioritize, steel is one of them. And that's always going to be my priority.
So this is the claim, right? U.S. Steel is like, look, we're going to go under. The jobs are going to disappear completely unless we can sell off to Japan. But the jobs are supposed to stay put. So U.S. Steel is just selling off, but nothing else is supposed to change. That's supposed to be it. But for some reason, the question that Kamala Harris heard, and I get it, it was a more difficult question. I mean, it starts off with steel's as important as the Liberty Bell, which is an odd statement to say the least. But it makes it innately sound like Japan buying U.S. steel presents some sort of homeland security threat, like it would if China was buying it or something. It doesn't really, she doesn't explain why exactly Japan buying it would be a problem. Japan buys a lot of steel in the U.S. already. Now, I happen to know they import a lot of steel into the U.S., and so you could have concerns maybe about, there being a monopoly on steel in the U.S. That could be other concerns, but they're not very clear. So instead of the question that she should have responded to, so the question she was asked, based on the mentioning of Japan and everything else, the correct question to pick to respond to is about how important it is to protect supply lines in the U.S., U.S.-based supply lines, U.S.-based jobs. I think that would be the question you'd want to pick to answer. But instead, Kamala Harris decided to answer the question, is steel important? Which, once again, in the spirit of the question you were asked, like when they say answer the question you wished you were asked, it doesn't mean if someone asks what your favorite color is, you then go into a ramble about your favorite movie. And I think the more you watch Kamala Harris, the more you're going to see that that is a problem she has. It's something that, of course, will need to be watched. And I think that's going to be her undoing, honestly, is that she is not nearly as smooth as a politician at her level running for president should be. Like I said, we will not be back the rest of this week, but we will be back here next Monday. But you can listen to old shows. Head over to theandrewshow.com. Till next Monday, we'll be seeing you.